I now give the floor to Mr. Huang Xia.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, I'm very happy to introduce to you the last report of the Secretary-General on the implementation of the Framework Agreement for Peace, Security and Cooperation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the region. Allow me, in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, which persists, to once again begin with a thought for the victims of this health crisis, and in particular for the women and young people who continue to pay the highest price, both in that region as well as elsewhere. As you'll imagine, the countries of the region throughout the recent period have left no stone unturned in order to attempt to contain the spread of the virus and to respond to its negative effects economically and socially. The governments and peoples of the region have continued to show resilience and determination in their fight against this global crisis. I would like to express my solidarity with them. I would also like to recognize here the commitment of the governments of the region to pursue their efforts to bring about an improvement of political, economic and security cooperation in accordance with the commitments of the Framework Agreement and the 2006 Compact on Security, Stability and Development in the Great Lakes region. At this time, as I address the Council, the Chiefs of Staff of the member countries of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, ICGLR, are meeting to prepare for a meeting of their defense ministers in order to follow up on the implementation of the decisions taken by the heads of state at the Brazzaville summit in 2017. Mr. President, the situation in the region in recent months overall has remained stable with encouraging progress despite the persistent challenges. On the political side, I welcome the peaceful transfer of power in Burundi following the general elections in May 2020 and the possibilities for greater regional stability as illustrated by the return of Burundian refugees from Rwanda and Tanzania, as well as the visit of the Foreign Affairs Minister of DRC to Bujunbura on the 4th and 5th of October last. I also welcome the organization on the 7th of October by President Tshisekedi of the DRC of a mini-summit bringing together his counterparts from Angola, Uganda and Rwanda in order to discuss important issues relating to security and economic cooperation. This initiative points to a sustained commitment of the leaders of the region towards joint efforts which I hope will be able to be strengthened during the upcoming regional follow-up of the mechanism for the Framework Agreement. I also welcome the fact that the countries of the region are using diplomatic means and regional mechanisms to resolve their differences, as can be seen in the solving of the border dispute between DRC and Zambia. The commitment of Rwanda and Uganda to pursue the process of normalizing their relations through the good offices of Angola and DRC is another positive example of this. With regard to security and humanitarian affairs, however, the situation remains of concern in the east of the DRC, as was pointed out in her last report by my colleague Leila Zerougi, the head of MONUSCO. Cross-border incidents, sporadic incidents, and the activism of armed groups operating in the east of the DRC continue to be the cause of intolerable human suffering. The impunity enjoyed by those responsible for these crimes traumatizes these populations and negatively affects relations between these countries. We must therefore strengthen our efforts to fight impunity and I, for my part, plan to continue my advocacy amongst the countries of the region to ask them to strengthen their fight against impunity, particularly through an effective implementation of the Nairobi Declaration on Justice and Good Governance. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, allow me to say something about the initiatives that I have been leading since I last spoke to you on the 22nd of April, working together in particular with the African Union and the ICGRL in order to bring forward the implementation of the framework agreement, and it's centered around the 5 priorities that I mentioned last time. With regard to the mobilization of the international community for the countries of the region, my first priority, we asked the Peacebuilding Commission and international financial institutions for sustained help for the region given the devastating consequences of the pandemic. The resources mobilized for the countries of the region up until now have been significant, but are still considered to be insufficient by the IMF in order to really relaunch the situation ambitiously. I would again call upon international partners to facilitate options to financial alleviation adapted to the needs of the countries, including, but without not being limited to, the initiatives for alleviating and restructuring the debt. With regard to efforts to help the dialogue, my second priority, I had fruitful consultations with the authorities of Angola, Burundi, DRC, Uganda and Rwanda, amongst others, which gave me hope with regard to an improvement of the relations of good neighbourliness and for regional stability. With regard to regional security, my office has remained in close contact with the ICGLR in order to identify avenues of action for increased support for the efforts of the extended verification mechanism. We will continue also to work to promote non-military measures, such as strengthening programs of DDR and RR at the regional level. With regard to efforts to promote a transparent and sustainable exploitation of natural resources, which is my fourth priority, preliminary results of a study that was financed by my office have shown that even during the height of the pandemic, the illicit trade in minerals in the region unfortunately has not gone down, mainly due to the strong price of gold, a safe haven for money in times of uncertainty. With regard to my fifth priority, I am happy to note the decision of the DRC to organize a virtual meeting of the regional follow-up mechanism in order to overcome the constraints imposed by the pandemic. The Conference on Investment and Trade will be organized by the Rwandan authorities in 2021. As we celebrate the 20th anniversary of Resolution 1325, I welcome the progress that has been made in the Great Lakes region. Indeed, some of these countries are amongst the 25 nations that have the best level of representation of women in their parliaments in the world, throughout the world. However, aware as we are of the challenges that remain and the devastating effects of the pandemic on women, my office organized on the 28th of July, the 11th of August and the 20th of August 3 round tables dealing with women's private enterprise, the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, as well as the political participation of women in the context of COVID-19. The conclusions of these consultations recommend the full integration of the Women, Peace and Security agenda into peacebuilding and development efforts in the Great Lakes region, particularly through strengthened partnerships and through an effective engagement with women and young people. Mr. President, the last time I spoke to you, I referred to the preparation of the United Nations peacebuilding strategy and also for prevention and resolution of conflict in the Great Lakes region that was made at the request of the Secretary-General. I'm happy to inform you that following an inclusive process and thanks to the many contributions from all countries and partners of the region, I've now submitted this strategy yesterday, in fact, to headquarters and to the Secretary-General himself. Now, subject to the follow-up that the Secretary-General wishes to give to this, I can now tell you that 10 priorities structured around the 3 pillars, namely peace, security and justice, sustainable development and shared prosperity, resilience to former and new challenges, arose out of these various consultations that were held. These priorities aim to set an overall horizon of 10 years for United Nations action in the region, whilst concentrating on a number of specific priority actions, particularly in the area of preventive diplomacy, security cooperation, development, promotion of human rights, strengthening of the role of women and young people between now and 2023, a year which will mark the 10th anniversary of the Framework Agreement. Of course, the United Nations action can only be effective if everyone is on board. There needs to not only be full ownership of countries and organizations of the region, but also there needs to be ongoing support of the international community. I therefore call for the support of the Council in this regard. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, as always, I'd like to conclude on a note of hope in favour of a faraway region. Indeed, in the Great Lakes region, there is a space for discreet diplomacy and progressive diplomacy around certain sensitive issues which pollute regional relations. My discreet but committed action in support of initiatives underway in the region will continue. Moreover, I continue to work closely with MONUSCO, the resident coordinators of the United Nations system, as well as the co-guarantor institutions for the Framework Agreement in order to promote non-military measures in order to fight negative forces. This high-level political commitment as well as adequate resources are indispensable in order to improve the regional security environment. In this context, the holding of the next summit of the regional follow-up mechanism will be crucial in order to obtain political ownership at the highest level of the countries of the region. Finally, given the worrying economic impact of COVID-19, it will also be essential to intensify efforts for dynamic economic cooperation around the cross-border projects, and that there be shared management of natural resources using a holistic approach that will include all actors, basing ourselves on strengthened regional mechanisms, particularly those of the ICGLR. Despite the outstanding challenges and the pandemic is not least amongst them, the peoples and countries of the Great Lakes region continue to show great resilience and determination to move forward. I call upon the Security Council to remain engaged and to maintain support for the region in a sustained manner. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Huang Xia for his briefing